It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. Joining me on the show today is Michelle Rees, who owns a tiny home in the countryside of Victoria with her husband Joe. And Michelle, Joe, and their 3 young kids split their time between their home in Melbourne and their tiny house in the country, which they also rent out on Airbnb as a unique luxury off-grid experience. And in this conversation, we talk about how tiny house living makes you realize what's really important and how few material items you actually need, what kinds of family-friendly features they included in their tiny build, what it's like for a family of 5 to live in a small space. We also talked about how living in a tiny home has deepened Michelle and her family's connection to each other and the earth, and how you can experience living in Michelle's family's tiny home through their unique off-grid Airbnb experience, and so much more. Michelle shares lots of valuable insights on transitioning and living in a tiny house with 3 young kids, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. So let's go chat with Michelle. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. So, Michelle, you currently split your time between living in a beautiful tiny home with your husband and 3 kids in country Victoria, and then also your home in Melbourne. And I'd love if you're able to start by sharing with us, what inspired you to have a tiny house built for you and your family, and what appealed most to you about, moving towards this tiny house way of living?
Sure. So our journey started quite a while back, actually. It's probably about 7 years ago now that my wonderful husband, Joe, surprised me with a Valentine's gift that was a weekend away in country Victoria. And it turned out to be quite a long trip, so about 5 hours out of town. And I realised why he kept it a surprise later on, because I probably wouldn't have been putting my hand up for that long drive for a long weekend at that time. But we went along anyway, and it was lovely. And we got to the location and we kind of both immediately fell in love with it. And literally the following day, we started looking at properties in the area. And that led us very quickly to decide that we did want some substantial land out there, and just to really kind of embrace this beautiful kind of country lifestyle. And so for us, the journey actually started with wanting, I suppose, to understand and enjoy more of country Victoria. And the tiny house came on the agenda because what we found was that once we did find this beautiful piece of paradise out in country Victoria, it became obvious to us fairly quickly that we didn't need a lot on the site to be able to really get this benefit of our surroundings. And so we actually went with our 3 children for about a week of camping, and we had a tent. And we had some, we took some water and some toilet facilities. But, given we had sort of 3 small children at that time, we had a 5-month-old, a 2.5-year-old and a 4-year-old with us. And we just had the most amazing week up there. And it was at that point that it really struck me that I thought, what, we don't need a lot out here to really get the benefits that we're looking for and really enjoy the space. And so as I started to sort of investigate and do some research on what sort of dwelling we could put out there, I very quickly came across tiny houses as an alternative. And starting to investigate that really opened up our thinking into what the tiny house could deliver for us in this environment.
That's really beautiful. And I love that I guess this idea of having land and being closer to nature, it really kind of puts things in perspective and makes you think about, what's most important, and how you want to live your life, and simplifying things, and all of that. And I love that you've got three little ones as well coming along for the ride. I think it's a really nice thing to expose them to at such a young age, and a nice way for them to grow up. You had a professional builder construct your tiny home. I'm wondering, how did you come across your builder, and do you have any advice for others that are looking to find a good builder for their home?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's like anything. Research is the answer here. For us, we were very fortunate in that we went looking for a tiny house and came across a builder. And it is funny how you kind of make connections with people. But I had one conversation, and within that one conversation, we discovered that it was a husband and wife team, and we discovered that they had actually lived on the road that our property was situated on, and they had lived on a property further down that road in a tiny house for a number of years. And so that created an immediate connection with them, actually. And we ended up having them build our tiny house. And really for us, I mean, aside from kind of making that immediate connection, it was really about the quality and the craftsmanship that they brought to the table, and also their ability to customize something that was suitable for a family. So we're a little bit different. I think there's probably not that many families that are, utilizing a tiny house environment for, 2 adults and 3 children. And so it's not necessarily going to be something that would, something that would suit a couple is appropriate for a family as well. So we did have to do some customization, and it is a family size, I would call it, tiny house. So still fits the definition of a tiny house, but it is definitely family size. So for us, we did need something bigger than what the standard tiny house sort of looks like, and these guys were really willing to work with us to customize the plans and really bring to life something that was appropriate for our family. And because they'd been in the tiny house space for some time and they had experience living within a tiny house environment, they were really great at helping us think about how to maximize that space and really get the most out of it in terms of, storage and utilizing those spaces for multiple purposes as you need to do when you're living in a tiny house environment. So, as I said, there was an immediate connection, but it was something more than that. It was a willingness to customize and just really beautiful craftsmanship that we saw in what they were doing.
I love that you made that connection, and I think there's something really unique and valuable about them having that prior experience, because then they know, what works, what doesn't work, might have ideas on different things. And I guess in a way, or on some level, knowing, what it is like to live that lifestyle. And so good that, you came across them. And you mentioned, so customizing, and that it's like a family size home. So what size roughly is your home, and what kind of features did you feel like you really wanted to and needed to have to make your tiny home family friendly?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think we're under I think it's 50 square meters, and we sit slightly under that. So if you can imagine, we're sort of essentially 2 pods that have been brought together. So the main pod holds the kitchen and the bathroom facilities and a dining room and 2 loft areas, which would typically be used as sleeping areas or bedrooms in a standard tiny house. But we also have a second pod which holds a living area. So it has room for a couch and a television and a really beautiful fireplace. And then there's 2 bedrooms. So one holds a queen size bed, and the other has 2 really beautiful built-in bunks. So it really is, it really does give you plenty of space for us and the 3 children. And we found that it works incredibly well.
Sounds like a really beautiful home and beautiful features. Do you have a favourite feature in your home?
Yeah, look, I do have a couple of favourite features. I think probably one of the things I didn't mention that really it makes such an enormous difference to the livability of the home, and that is we have a really large deck that's probably, now I don't know what the measurements are, but it's it probably at least doubles the living space of the tiny house, and that's an undercover area. And it just provides you another area where you can have a barbecue and outdoor seating, whether it's a table and chairs to kind of dine outdoors, or just an area to sit outside and kind of soak up the environment. Having that undercover decking area really adds to the livability, and it makes it feel so much more spacious, I suppose, than it really is. So it really kind of optimizes your ability to enjoy the outdoors but still feel the benefit of having that undercover area, particularly, where we're in an alpine area and you do get some interesting weather out there. It really does allow you to have a little bit more room on those rainy days for the children as well. So having the outdoor deck is a helpful attribute to the house. One thing we didn't talk about, and I would kind of add, is that, and part of the reason why the tiny house was appealing to us is because, there's something really beautiful about the land being, untouched. And I really noticed it even moving from camping to moving to the tiny house situation. We clearly have the benefit of the amenity and we have all of the modern conveniences at our disposal. There's really nothing that we want for up there. I mean, we can wash our clothes and we can wash our dishes. We've got a dishwasher and washing machine, dryer, all those things. And, our family routine runs in a pretty similar way, albeit we're off the grid up there. So, we've had to learn all about solar power and composting toilets, and clearly, you make some adjustments to the way we do things so that we can maximize the power usage during the day, for example. But, one of the things that really has struck me is that, you benefit from that amenity, but in doing that, you're then kind of touching a space in a really different way. And so keeping that touch as light as possible, I think is a huge benefit. And what do I mean by that? Well, when we were out there camping, and of course we still do this, and we still have the original fireplace that we sat around on that very first camping trip. And, you sit back and you look, you can put your head up and, where we are out there, it's quite isolated. And, the stars are frankly like nothing I've seen anywhere else in the world. The night sky is just phenomenal on a clear night. And, now that we've got the tiny house, we find ourselves sitting on the deck and, it's really interesting, but you can't have that same experience of your surroundings once you've touched the land. So we sit on the deck and we love the amenity, but, your experience of the night sky is really different. So, it wasn't something that struck me until after we'd kind of taken this path. But I think there's some sort of trade-off, I suppose, in, the level of impact that you have on the land and the space. And, then the way that you enjoy that environment. And I think that's something really beautiful about keeping the touch as light as possible.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it seems to be a common story just from speaking to so many people in this space that, having this or living this tiny lifestyle really connects you more to nature. It connects you more to even the weather and to your everyday workings of your home. And as you talked about, needing to learn about solar and composting toilets, and having more involvement in those day-to-day workings of your life, rather than typically, I suppose, and obviously not everyone, but just in a general sense, and I'm speaking from someone that's mostly lived in the city, having a lot of those things done for you or outsourced, and sort of like a more convenient way. And I think there is something really beautiful about having to learn all these new skills and new ways of being, I suppose, as well. And the whole deck thing, I think, is really appealing too. It does help to bring the outside in, and to put you outside in nature, and as you say, under the stars and the night sky and the sun and all of that, and reconnecting with who we really are and where we came from, which is our natural environment. So that's beautiful.
I couldn't agree more. And your point around connection is a really interesting one, because just to build on that, I would also highlight that, it connects you to people. So the reality is that in a tiny house, you can't kind of disappear into your own space particularly easily. And so you do end up spending more time together, for better or for worse. Sometimes you might want to go and disappear into your own space. And the reality is that's just a little bit more difficult to do within that environment. But I would say for us, it's definitely enhanced the level of family connection, because you're just physically seeing more of each other. And you find that the dining table, it's not just a place to sit and share a meal with a family. It's a place for the board game, and it's a place for the children to do their artwork, and it's a place to get the cards out and have a game of cards with them. We love Uno up there. The children love playing Uno, and that's around the table. So, there's this beautiful multi-purpose to these spaces, but the common theme is that we're connecting perhaps in ways and more frequently than you would ordinarily, and that is by virtue of the fact that there's not a lot of choices. That's kind of the way it has to be, but it's beautiful at the same time, because it gives you so much more opportunity for connection. And I think, the other thing is, as you point out, there's a level of awareness and insight that comes from being or becoming self-sufficient. And it's really interesting, but you can't unsee it. And what do I mean by that? So I've kind of said we're completely off the grid up there. So where we came and a few years ago we camped with literally nothing. Now we have pretty much everything, but we're not connected to any services. So we have, as I said, the solar power to the tiny house, and we have a composting toilet because water is an issue up there, and we have water tanks, and you're literally catching your water from the roof of a tiny house, which is already a pretty small space, and that's all the water that you have. And so we're really mindful of, when we're washing the dishes, for example, I'm really mindful of how much water I'm using. And, it's so interesting, because when we come back to Melbourne, as I said, you just can't unsee that kind of stuff. And you do become much more conscious of what you're using to live, regardless of whether, it's coming from, your solar powered panels or from the grid in the city. It's really interesting, but you just can't unsee that stuff once you see it. And it really has made us think differently about lots of things. I think probably the other thing I'd say is, with a family in a small space like that, and as I said, running our routine pretty much the way we do in the city, albeit more mindfully, I would say, for some of the reasons that we've spoken about. One of the things that I think is on people's minds is, how am I going to fit into this tiny house environment, and particularly with family, because anyone with children knows there's just so much stuff that comes along with having children. And if you thought you had a lot of stuff before them, you're going to have exponentially more after they arrive. And I think what I would say is, we really don't want for anything while we're up there. We don't feel like we're missing anything. And that is because we have made really conscious choices. And, you might say trade-offs, but I would say conscious choices around the things that we have up there. And sometimes they are hard choices, but they are only hard choices in the moment that you're making them. And afterwards, you kind of adapt to, doing things perhaps slightly differently, and eventually you don't notice at all. But I would say it's really achievable, and if you kind of, as I said, you have a greater connection to the outdoors up there, and a greater connection to the family and to people. But I think that you do have to let go of the things. The things need to not make the trip, because the tiny house environment really only works if you can make smart choices around how you use the space. And, it needs to be used for things that are frequently required, and, things you really can't do without. And so I think for some people, making those choices up front can be difficult. And certainly there's some things we had to think really hard about. But as I said, once those choices are made, what we found anyway is you kind of get on with it. And in time, you don't notice at all. It's just a different way of living. And, that extends to the children as well. So, they don't have loads and loads and loads of toys up there. And that's partly because the activities that we do up there are a little bit different. There's more to do in utilising the outdoor spaces and getting outside and enjoying that part of the environment. We're very blessed that we have a little herd of alpacas up there, and, so they're out tending to the animals and enjoying the outdoors in a way that, is just really different to living in the city. But they still have toys up there. We're not kind of depriving them of anything, but it's definitely not, the level that you find when you have the space to have them in a normal sized house. So I just think making those choices is really interesting, and it's been enlightening how easy it has been to let go of some of those things.
Yeah, I love that. And what I'm hearing you say, talking about conscious lifestyle choices, that it is really a realignment with your values and what's most important, and realizing what it is that you actually do need. Are our basic needs met? Food, water, shelter, community, family, and then, living in an intentional way. So, and creating that lifestyle for yourself and your family. So I think that, yeah, it's just beautiful what you described. And as you were also talking about the solar and the composting toilets and all of that, it just reminded me, we were talking about connection before, of also really connecting us to the elements. So, through the use of the solar system, you're more connected to the sun. And then through the use of the water tank, you're more connected to the water, and to the use of the composting toilet, you're more connected to the earth. And also just being there, you are on land, you are more connected to the earth. So I think that's a really insightful experience to have in living in a tiny home with your family.
Yeah, and look, as I said, these things don't come without compromise, but I think probably one of the most important things for us has been just having a level of flexibility and adaptability, and, really not sweating the small stuff, and, seeing this whole thing as an adventure. So, when we first went up there and the tiny house was delivered and set up, it was very late winter we were having, and it was kind of, I don't know, late September, even early October. And something had gone wrong with our fireplace, and they couldn't fit it. So we were in there with the 3 children, and it's snowing. So it's kind of, down at 0. And it was so cold. And we're very blessed that we have a wonderful kind of reverse cycle system in there for heating. And so, not kind of thinking too much about it. And, with the kids obviously wanting to keep everyone warm and comfortable, we kind of fired that thing up, and it was cold overnight. So we had it going the whole night until we're kind of on the second night. Where to find the first night? And the second night, 3 a.m., we woke up and, wow, boy, was it cold in there. And at that point, we realized we had no power at all. And, probably shouldn't have been too surprised because we've been running this heater nonstop for however long. And so, poor old Joe, he got the job of putting on his coat and hat and boots, and out he went into the snow to have probably one of his first interactions with that solar system. And look, to be honest, the generator should have automatically switched on, and it should have been absolutely fine to kind of get us through to the morning. But like anything, when you're setting up, and it's not a small thing to be setting up life in a space where humans haven't been living before, and you're not connected to services. You've got to expect that it's not going to go to plan from day one, and particularly if you don't know anything about this stuff, which is where we were at. I mean, we'd camped a few times before, but we'd certainly not really experienced anything like off-grid living. And yeah, there was some hiccups. And so, out Joe was at 3 in the snow. It's probably 0, even a bit below, and probably not the most pleasant of experiences. But I think you really need to approach these things with the understanding that it's probably not going to go completely smoothly from day dot. And there are going to be some challenges. And there have been, like, we've lost power lots of times out there. And we've had to discover that, some of our appliances that we had, aren't really meant to be run at the same time off this kind of a system. And, we've had to learn about things that were completely outside of our purview and weren't really required for our lifestyle before this. And, and we've made some changes to the way we do things as a result. But I think if you can approach those issues as little setbacks or challenges that you overcome, and then you feel really good about it, it's going to be helpful to, have that adaptability and flexibility. I think without that, this is pretty tough because, it's not easy, and particularly, and it is particularly resource intensive to get these things up and going. And it's a learning process. It's a journey, and there's lots of things we're still figuring out. And we read a lot, and we learn a lot from others and the tiny house community and the off-grid community online. And I think that will continue to be the case. But I think having that flexibility and being able to kind of frame things in a perspective that means you've got this ongoing learning has certainly been helpful for us.
Yeah, and I guess with the self-sufficiency, as you say, it does come different types of challenges and on a day-to-day level with how everything functions, and talking about like what happened with the solar. So I think that's great, and yeah, just having that openness to learning as you go, and especially when it's things that haven't been exposed to before, or it's not really inside your comfort zone. So yeah, that's definitely a lot of great insights there for sure. And I'd love to know, so you've got 3 little kids under 5, I think it is, and I'm wondering, how has the experience been for them, and have you noticed, or have there been any noticeable shifts in them, when you compared to when you're in Melbourne in your home versus when you go into your tiny home in country Victoria?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And part of the reason that we came on this journey in the first place, and a big part of the reason actually, was because we felt like our life was quite insular. And particularly for the children, I wanted them to grow up understanding that there are really different ways of living. And I wanted them to kind of have that level of insight, as well as just being able to enjoy the outdoors through their childhood. It's probably something even a little bit more, there was a different level of insight even to that. And, and allowing them to really understand that connection with the earth and the environment. And, that was really important to us. So they were a huge part of why we came on the journey. Our eldest son has just turned 6 now. So we have a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And look, I think what I would say is, children are probably amongst the most adaptable of all of us, partly because they don't have these preconceived ideas, or at least as strongly preconceived, I think, as we do as adults. But the children absolutely love it up there. And it is a simpler way of living. So whilst we do our routine, things are definitely simpler. But for them, they love the outdoors. They love the space. They love to be able to run free and enjoy the animals as well. So that's a big part of life up there for them. Fundamentally, I think kids just do what they do. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. There's no doubt that it's had an impact on them, but it's kind of so entrenched in their life and the way they think about things. I'm not sure. It's a little bit different to us because we haven't had that level of insight before, whereas for them, they're really growing up with it. I mean, our little one, she was 5 months old when we went on that first camping trip. I mean, she will, I'm sure we'll probably have this our whole lives, and this will be something that she's known forever. So I just think for them, it's about them growing up with a really different level of insight around our impact on the earth and our usage of resources, and I guess that connection and respect for the planet. It's, I think it is something that initially we had to work on with them, don't leave the tap on and walk away, that kind of thing. And, it's clearly some coaching around how to use the composting toilet and so on. But now it's just become part of their lives and part of who they are. And I think that's a level of insight that everyone will benefit from them having, I think, because the respect that they have for the earth and the resources is just so much greater than would have otherwise been the case had they not had those experiences at this young age.
Yeah, what a gift it is that you're giving them in being exposed to this life or way of life from a young age. Yeah. And you guys also rent out your tiny home on Airbnb as a unique luxury off-the-grid experience. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's been quite a journey for us to get to this point, and it's, I think it's fair to say the journey we've taken is not necessarily the journey that we started on. But that's the interesting thing about journeys. You kind of go to unexpected places, which is, one of the beautiful things. And for us, what we really love about this is having the ability to share what we've created with other families. And we have had a number of other families come up and stay at the farm. And, the feedback has just been overwhelmingly positive from everyone. I mean, we've had couples come up as well as families with young children. And the feedback has just been overwhelmingly positive. And, the children have just loved the space and the farm and the animals. The alpacas are amazing, and they can be hand fed, and so it's kind of this whole experience in this kind of off-grid living environment. And so yeah, look, we just really love that we can share this with other people, and who knows, maybe it sparks the idea in someone else's mind that this might be a journey that's interesting for them as well.
So good. I think it's really nice to have an option to go and experience something like that for people, because, maybe they are thinking about going tiny, but they're a bit hesitant, or there's all sorts of questions, and to be able to experience it for themselves is so beautiful, and to give them the gift of what your family has also experienced.
And what I'd add to that is I really honestly feel like there's a perception that there's a level of compromise or trade-off that is unpalatable. I really think that is a perception that's out there. And it's only once you experience it that you find that it's really doable. Like, even with small children, it's still really doable. But I think, it's really interesting. There's kind of a psychological barrier, because we kind of, we grow up and what we see around us is that, particularly once you have a family, what you need is this. You need this however many bedroom house on this much land with, room for a slide and a swing and whatever the case may be. And a lot of the world doesn't live that way. A lot of the world families don't live that way. And actually, once you kind of test the hypothesis, you realize that there's other ways to do things. And hopefully that's a really positive experience for people.
I love that you said a lot of the world doesn't live that way. It is so true. I from having traveled around a lot of different parts of the world, there's so many people that are living so much more simply than we are, at least where I am in the city in Sydney, and I know other cities around the world too. So that's a really great point, and I think a really beautiful sentiment to close out the podcast on. And I just love to finally ask you, where can people find and connect with you online, Michelle?
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on Instagram, and it's at Thundering Hills. And we also have a website at thunderinghills.com.au.
Perfect. I'll put everything in the show notes for everyone so they can go and check you out and see what you're up to, and maybe even go and stay in your Airbnb experience. And I just want to say thank you, Michelle, so much for joining us today and for sharing your story and your family's experiences in tiny house living. I think it will be helpful for a lot of people, especially those with young kids. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, Lucy.
My pleasure. And if you're listening to this conversation today, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. If you want more tiny house conversations, I release new episodes every Thursday. So if you hit the subscribe button, you know exactly when the latest episode goes live. And until the next one, I'll see you then. Hey, Tiny Lifers, thanks so much for listening. And before you go, one of the best ways to support this podcast is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more valuable tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this episode and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks so much in advance. I appreciate you, and see you in the next session.